So welcome to the HPC Best Practices webinar series. This series is brought to you by the IDEAS Productivity Project, which is part of the exascale computing project of the US Department of Energy. The series is a collaboration involving the computing facilities at the Argonne, Oak Ridge, and Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories. I'm Osni Marquez from Lawrence Berkeley. Most of the time, Ashley Barker from Oak Ridge and I are the hosts for the webinar in this series, but today Mark Miller from Lawrence Livermore kindly agreed to play that role. So Mark, please take over. I'll stop my sharing.
Okay, thanks, Osni. And I will start sharing. I'm also pasting a link in the chat for the same things that I'm sharing here. Okay, it's my pleasure to moderate a conversation with Jean Shuler, a woman who has worked for more than 55 years in high performance computing and is finishing her 50th year here at Livermore Labs. I'm a huge history buff, and every time I have a chance to chat with Jean, I could sit with her for hours and talk about her experiences, especially in the early years at Livermore Labs. But today's conversation is not about for me to ask questions. I can ask questions anytime I sit with Jean. It's for all of you. So we've prepared a set of slides, which we plan to loop during today's conversation. The slides are primarily to provoke questions and include a notional chronometer up in the upper right corner there for every 5-year period from 1961. Dates are approximate, but because the slide share takes away space from the speaker video, it may become distracting, and if so, we can turn that off. I've also posted a link to the slides in the chat if it's helpful. You can submit questions via chat or Google Doc, and Osni, I'll need your help on the questions that come in through the Google Doc. Or you can use Zoom's raise hand feature, and we will call on you to unmute and ask your question. Call in only participants will need to wait until maybe the last 10 to 15 minutes of the conversation today to ask a question. I know that some of you attending may wish to make a few remarks or share a thing or two about your work with Jean, and if you do, please use the Zoom raise hand feature for that, but also be mindful of time and allowing others to participate by keeping your questions or remarks brief, like maybe a minute. So I'll start with a few questions, but my hope is I'm going to see some raised hands rather quickly from others who wish to make remarks or ask questions or comments in the chat. In fact, before I go further, I need to make sure that I'm actually seeing my chat. Okay, there we go. And Osni did post a link for the Google Doc in the chat as well, so you can go there to ask questions as well. So as the slides go by, I know we've already gone through a few of them, but Jean, you graduated from William & Mary in, I think, '63 with a major in mathematics. And I guess my first question to you is, what prompted you to study mathematics?
I just loved it in grade school, high school. I liked to do puzzles and things like that. And I was pretty good at it. So it was just something I like to do. I mean, just playing around with the mathematical models and things like that, and getting into computing was fun.
Now, when you majored in math at William & Mary, you mentioned computing there. Were there anything remotely looking like a computer science or programming class available to you then? No,
it was the year I graduated in '63. They had a seminar about how to program in Fortran, but you didn't have any hands-on or anything. It was just a speaker getting up talking about programming language. So I think that's why they hired me at NASA. I had a 30-minute interview with NASA in March or April, and I came to NASA in June of 1963, not knowing what I was getting myself into. So wow.
And in your coursework, how many other women were taking mathematics with you? Was it quite popular among women then?
No, I think there were maybe 3 or 4 of us in all of the mathematics classes. We did tensor analysis and different partial differential equations. And actually when I started at NASA, they didn't know what to do with me, so they gave me some partial differential equations to solve while they were trying to figure out if I could do programming.
And did you have to basically then solve those manually?
Yes, right.
So that's very interesting. I mean, many people have seen the movie Hidden Figures, probably aware of NASA's use of women for computing, but the word computer for many years in human history, in fact, most of human history, I'm sorry, not computing, but the word computer actually did not refer to a machine, but it referred to a person, usually a woman, doing manual calculations. And Jean is one of many women who was basically hired as a human computer for NASA. And so that makes me ask. I have all sorts of questions I'd love to ask about that. I'm curious. Do you have a recollection of, like, did you have to invert really big matrices, like 10 by 10 matrices and stuff by hand?
At first, that's how you did it, by hand, and then figuring out. I mean, there were some other ways during the when I was learning Fortran. There were some libraries that you could use that did matrix inversion, but by hand was, it was very tedious. You learn how to do that in college, though. So, yeah, I was called a computer when I worked during my years at. While I was in school, I worked at a company and I was called a computer there, but I just used a calculator and did some failure analysis on submarines. So and then drew curves for that. But I was called a computer at NASA, and the women who were in the Hidden Figures were there when I was there, but I didn't even know about them until I saw the movie. So they were kept isolated from us. But we all took our punch cards to the same computer center.
Wow. Well, so now you hired as a human computer, but it sounds like maybe during your time there, you did start doing some amount of programming.
Yes, almost right away. I had taken that lecture on Fortran. And so I worked with some, like Felix Pitts and Lou Reddish and some of those guys who gave me computing, they needed to have computer programs written for some of their applications. Satellite, it was called the Flight Instrumentation Division. So they had cameras on some of the satellites.
So, and how long were you at Langley?
I was there 5 years until my husband got a job at Livermore Lab. And then they would not hire me in 1968 because they weren't hiring spouses, which was, to me, a ridiculous rule, because people met and got married there and they didn't kick one of them out. So in 1972, they changed that rule, and a whole bunch of women who had put their husbands through graduate school got hired there. So it's an interesting
to Livermore area, I guess, in '68. I wanted to work at the lab, but because of their rules, you weren't able to. So you worked at a place called MB Associates, correct?
That's where I met your father.
Yeah. So that's an interesting bit of connection we have, as you worked with my father. So what were you doing computing activities for MBA as well?
Yes, they designed chaff for rockets. And so I wrote a program for dispersion of chaff to block incoming signals, but we had to use punched cards. So we didn't have a big computer at MBA. So I would drive the cards down to a place in Sunnyvale and run them through their 1620s and get the output and take it back to the scientists. So
wow. So you basically, that sounds a little bit like FootNet at some level, as you had to take these decks of cards down to Sunnyvale and run them there.
Right.
Now, is that because that was the closest computing facility available?
Yeah, you could buy time there on a 1620. So
okay. All right.
They were standing in line for people from other companies who were running their card decks through the 1620 machine.
Oh, wow. That would have been interesting to have a photo of a bunch of different companies lined up to run their decks through. Right. How long did a typical computer run take for that? For example, maybe the chaff simulation or something?
It didn't take that long because they were fairly simple codes, but I'd sit there for a couple hours and wait for my output and then drive it back. So back then, there wasn't much traffic back then. So
okay. Yeah, that would be quite slow having to do that today. I imagine driving down 580 or whatever, going over the grade to get into the Bay Area. Now, was the output just printout, or was it more? Okay, it was printout.
Right.
All right. Now, did you ever have the misfortune of walking somewhere with a deck of cards, Fortran cards, and dropping them?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
That's why they were numbered. So you can put them back through a sequencer and get them back in the right order.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. I recall my father mentioning that happening to him on multiple occasions. So you were at MBA for it sounds like 68 to maybe 70. I guess 72 is when you hired at Livermore Labs.
Right.
Okay. And so what was the hiring and interview process like? Was it an all-day affair, or was it relatively short?
Well, I had actually interviewed with in 1968 when they told me I couldn't get a job there. So when I interviewed in 1972, I'd had a bunch of experience. So it was maybe an hour interview. And then I went over to work for MFE, with the magnetic fusion area. But I sat in the cooler and for several months getting my clearance before I was able, using old teletypes. We had these old teletypes.
So maybe you can share with the group what you mean by the cooler.
Oh, the cooler was in building 415, and it's where all new hires got sort of stuck. So there were people, engineers and physicists and chemists and, you know, all kinds of people that you met, which was really great because it was a good bonding experience for people who, you know, you'd see them at the lab for the next 20 years and you'd been in this unair conditioned huge room with teletypes all during the summer, you know, 6 months during the summer when it was ghastly hot. So, but it was good to meet all these people that were friends for forever, really, and good, you know, good contacts, different areas. I don't think they do that anymore. Yeah.
I still do hear well, I still think we call that building that new hires wind up sitting in for a while while they're waiting for the clearance, the cooler. It certainly was when I got there as well. Now I'm looking for any hand raises. Osni, am I perhaps missing any questions in the Google Doc or hand raises? I think Barbara's trying to get our attention here, but it looks like, Barbara, it looks like you're having trouble with your audio. And I really apologize for that. Go ahead, Osni.
There is one question in the Google Doc, but it's more related to running.
Oh.
Well, that's perfectly fine. We had a picture. So you got into running, I guess, with the LRL road runners shortly after you got to Livermore Labs, I guess, correct?
Well, actually, it was a big competition. There were some guys I worked with that were very competitive, and they wanted to race against B division, who had runners, so they needed a woman. So they talked me into running a mile, and that was the start of the run for home and my running career at the lab. So
wow. So Osni, go ahead. Please ask the question about running.
Okay, how many thousand miles have passed beneath your feet over 55 years of lunchtime runs?
Oh my gosh. Well, we would run, I don't know if I can calculate it. I started running probably in the late 70s, and we would run at least once a week we'd run the 8-mile loop, and then the other days we'd run 4 or 5. So that was, but it was good bonding, and it was, you know, we talked about work and complained about different things, but it was very challenging and fun to meet different people on the road. It was a big running craze back then. So,
well, and you still go out and run pretty regularly right now, don't you?
Oh yeah, it's I don't call it running anymore. It's more jogging.
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky if I can get in a full mile, Jean, before my legs or feet are telling me I need to stop. So I'm pretty impressed with that, to be quite honest.
Well, you're the cyclist, so you guys, the cyclotrons pass us on the road.
Yeah, that's another major fitness group at the lab on bikes. So okay, now I'm not seeing any hand raises, but I may pick on Ned because I see Ned among the video here, and I had a chat with him. And there's a question that came in as well. But nonetheless, Ned, I know that you had mentioned to me earlier you did want an opportunity to make a remark or two. Would now be an appropriate time?
Sure, I appreciate that, Mark. So first, I'll just start by thanking you, Jean, for agreeing to do this. It's a wonderful gift that you're giving us to share, everything you've learned over your career. And I know you're not a person who seeks the spotlight. So thank you for doing this. It's more for all of us than it is for you. And it's wonderful to see all these pictures and hear these stories. So, I've been working with you in LC in more recent times. I've been at the lab for about 20 years, and I think I've known you in some capacity or other over most of that time. And, currently you're serving as a workforce manager and a technical consultant in our hotline. And, what I really appreciate about what you do is, you make this a better place to work in so many ways and for so many people. Particularly, in your involvement with our students and our early career employees through the HPC Cluster Engineering Academy, and building that sense of community. You just have an amazing and tremendous ability to connect with people, to build networks and connect with people on a human level, and just improve our working lives. And you. One way you do that, and you share this with me, right, is that you listen when people call you in the hotline. You keep a keen ear open for what kind of work they're doing on our systems, and you think about, is this something that our people in LC would like to hear about, to share the science and the impact that our work is having. So often in LC, we're focused on keeping the machines running and keeping the queues full and so on. So it's, you make that extra effort to bring the science back to us, to bring speakers back to share their work with us. So thank you for that. So I'll just, for the sake of time, I'll end with a question, which is pretty open-ended, but, what advice do you have for us who will be kind of carrying on your legacy, developing the workforce, working with early career employees and students? What are the big challenges you see that are ahead for us, and how can we, for lack of better words, not screw it up?
Well, I think making the new employees comfortable and just having them be available to answer any kinds of questions for them, find mentors for them. To me, that's one of the most important things, is when you get new employees to always be helpful, and no question is stupid. So it's really, it's just finding a way to connect with them in whatever capacity and make them comfortable. So, young people are our futures. And so it's great to have them there.
So thank you, Ned, for those remarks and questions. And I see some more coming in, Jean. So I'm just going to recite some of those that I see. And Osni, as you need to from the Google Doc as well, please interrupt. So here's one from Philippe Blaine. Over the course of your career, what was the most transformative technology you worked with?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think going from the 66 and 70 CDC 66 and 7600s, from the 60-bit words into the 64-bit words was really a challenge. And then having the Mako, we had the Mako there too. And then, so it seems like Livermore gets one of a kind to test the new quantum computers now, or is a fabulous experiment to see how that's going to go. And we have a good group that's doing that, but it's just changes. Every time we get a new machine, there's something different, new programming models, new hardware. GPUs has been fabulous to get GPUs out there too.
For people who may not be completely aware what those are, GPU, general graphics processing units, which were originally created to do a lot of graphics, such as you may see on the screen now, but have also been able to do some amazing floating point calculations at super high speeds. Okay, thanks. Another question, Jean. Let's see. This is from David Smith. When I was at NASA Ames, our Cray YMP had wiring issues and actually burned some wires. Did your YMP at the lab have issues too?
I'm not sure. Maybe we have some hardware people on here that might know that. I actually vaguely remember something about that. Does anybody else have any information on that? But I do know we had some YMP issues. So that might have been what they were.
What, now that we're talking about some of these machines, Jean, so you worked initially with the CDC 6600 and 7600, and that was for the magnetic fusion energy program, which is sort of was the seeds of what eventually became NERSC, correct?
Right, right.
Do you have, well, I'm just curious out of that era, if you have a favorite machine.
I think ASCII Blue, one of the Blue Pacific machines that we had, and ASCII White, they were fabulous machines that people from the Tri-Labs used, and we wrote a lot of documentation, and it was really the forefront of some of the big computational challenges that we had. So I think those were my favorite machines. Got a lot of use out of them and got a lot of good performance, and #1 on the top 500 list for a while too. So
how about so I see some other questions in chat here, and by the way, I'm going to ask for advice from either Osni or maybe Lois whether or not the slides are more of a distraction or I should keep looping them.
I think you can continue.
Well, I'm enjoying them.
Me too. Yes.
Okay, so,
Mark, yes.
all right, we'll keep looping them. Thanks. Moving on, before I get, William Langham has a question here. What was your most memorable moments in your career?
I think when NERSC went to Berkeley in 1996 and was a really memorable, it was pretty devastating to have the computer center be moved, and all of us at NERSC were trying to decide whether to go up to Berkeley or stay at the lab. And at that time, we all had to apply for jobs over at Livermore, which I think was best for Livermore because a lot of people didn't want to go to Berkeley. So I built a customer service group over at Livermore. So I think that might have been my one of my most memorable moments, was moving from when NERSC left and moving to Livermore and meeting all of the great people over there. It was the start of a new career really for me.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for that question. I see someone has their hand raised. Barbara, I see you have your hand raised. Do you think you have an audio working now?
Can you hear us?
Yes, we hear you, Barbara.
Okay, here's Felix.
Yeah, hi, Jeannie. And by the way, Jeannie is what we called her back at NASA in the old days. It's good to see you again, Jeannie.
Nice to see you. It's great. We had a great time back there. They stuck me in with the secretary because they didn't know what to do with me.
I recall.
And I'm Barbara, and I remember I first knew Jeannie. She used to come in our office, and I need to mute. Okay.
There's some feedback in there.
I've got a little vibration there. Anyway, Jeannie used to come in our office and speak to us when she came over to the computation center. That's how I first knew her.
Right. We had some good times there. It was sad for me to leave. That was really sad. I think I cried from Virginia all the way to California.
Well, Jeannie, this is Felix again. I do recall when you and Bill came to Barbara for my wedding in April of 1971.
Oh, right.
I remember that very well.
Cool. Yeah.
So I would try to help with the echo problem, but I'm having difficulty isolating it. So my apologies.
Yeah, the same here.
Desktop, so we can see everything better, but we don't have a camera on the desktop.
Okay.
So we've got our individual cell phones.
Okay. Let's see. I'm trying to go down the list to see where that's coming from, and honestly, I just can't figure it out. So my apologies. I did restart the slide roll again, and I'm sorry, Barbara and Felix, did you have a question you wanted to ask Jean as well?
No, I don't
think so.
Okay.
No technical questions of any import.
Well, we sure appreciate you joining us as well. So I'll move on through some of the questions here. It looks like I got a comment. They like the slides, so that's good. In fact, I'm gonna so some of the pictures you see passing now are actually from the NASA Langley days, so I'm going to circle back before I get to a couple of questions that have appeared here in chat. So when you came to Livermore, or even at Langley for that matter, did you end up having to sort of conform to a dress code of any sort?
Yeah, we were not, I don't think it was actually written anywhere, but women had to wear dresses or skirts. And so I think finally somebody let us we had to wear, what do you call them? Pantsuits. They let us wear pantsuits. And once you let us put on pants, you know, we could wear whatever we wanted, because the guys were walking around in shorts and everything else, but the women were supposed to wear dresses and nylons and high heels. Same at NASA too, which was interesting. But
wow. So well, now that was going to be my next question. Was the dress code only for the women? It sounds like it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Jean, Mark, there is a question here in the Google Doc that's related.
Sure.
Excuse me. What changes have you seen in the proportion? Well, actually, it's not quite, but what changes have you seen in the proportion of women in HPC and the work environment for women?
Well, actually, you know, I think it's really different at Livermore because we have a lot of women in HPC, but I'm not sure how that is in other places. But women are very much supported in our computing center and in our computing directorate at Livermore. I mean, we have some spectacular women. I don't remember, other than the women at NASA, which were in, you know, the computing from Hidden Figures, I don't remember a whole lot there. But I think the numbers are actually going down now about women in computing in other places. But at Livermore, I think they're very much supported.
Another one then.
Oh, go ahead, Osni.
Okay, so what is one advice you would give a female student who would want to venture into a career focused on HPC? Any regrets? Anything you think you could have done differently?
Well, I certainly don't have any regrets. I think one of the things that I mentioned earlier was the best advice would be to, well, maybe never marry a physicist, but other advice would be to find a really good mentor, you know, find someone who you can connect with and just, you know, be really open and not be afraid to ask any questions at all, but just really be, if you, and take opportunities wherever you can, even if it sounds like a stretch. If somebody offers you something that you think would be fun, but you're not sure you're capable, you know, go for it. It's fun to take risks and do something different too. Work in different areas.
And Mark, I see there are a couple of questions.
Yeah.
There's the chat, if you can.
Sure. I'm going to circle back to William Langham's question, and then we'll continue through them. Jean, how many people would you say have come to LLNL or perhaps another STEM area because of your recruiting?
Oh my gosh. Actually, I think a lot. I mean, I've done recruiting at Northern Arizona University. We've got some spectacular people from there. Sonoma, San Jose State, even William and Mary. I've gotten a bunch of people from William and Mary to come. We've had, at NERSC, we had a Superkids program where we had high school kids come for a couple of weeks, and I actually had them staying at my house. And I taught ray tracing to them for, you know, it was a fun adventure. But we still have people at the lab, 2 people at the lab who went through our Superkids program back in the 90s. Through Expanding Your Horizons, the Girls Conference, I think, and our HPC Academy that we've been running for the last, I've been involved for 3 years. We've gotten some excellent, outstanding students there. And I think it's just, making it a warm, welcoming environment and showing that there's a lot of things that I see Martin saying he's here because of me.
Oh yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that, Martin.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, I'll continue on to another question. So this is from, I'll maybe mispronounce it, Nathisha Naka. What problems, obstacles do you see persisting for women and other marginalized groups in predominantly white male dominated STEM fields? Ooh, wow, that's a focused question.
Right. Well, I think it's been the same for forever. As women tend not to be heard, they have to learn to speak up and not be thought of as being kind of obnoxious. It's difficult to be in a meeting with all men and try to get your voice heard. I don't know. It's just a gender thing where we just have to speak up for ourselves and make sure that people know what we're saying.
Now, early on, Jean, did you perhaps find that somewhat challenging in your first few years, either within either Langley? Well, I'll focus on Livermore specifically, just because that's where I have an affinity. Was that finding your voice to be able to do that? Was that maybe difficult? And if so, how did you manage to overcome that?
Well, I think a lot of women, because we would get together, a lot of women, and we all had the same, nobody listens to us, but it tends to be just that you need to be more forceful. And if you say something and then nobody hears, and then a guy will say the same thing, you have to say, yeah, that was my idea too, just to make sure that people understood that you had the same ideas. But it was always, I don't think it's as much a problem now, but it was for a while.
Mm-hmm. And so just because we had a couple of slides go by with some of those early, and I'm going to put an air quote here, printer tests that people would run on the machines early on, it was the culture was okay to basically have some pretty risque, racy either photos or printouts posted up in people's offices.
Oh yeah, that was the standard printer test, was pinups. So every time we'd get a new printer, they'd run this special, program through, and then they would put these pinups on the walls to show that the printers would work. And then when I first came to Livermore, they did have in our newsline, they had weekly pinups of women at the lab swimming pool, because we had an Olympic-sized swimming pool, because the lab used to be a Navy base where they trained Navy SEALs. And so they would take pictures and put them in the lab newspaper. And I think I saw one through, it said, the Nevada test site has pretty girls too, a pinup sitting next to a swimming pool. But they stopped that I think the men complained, and the men wanted pinups of them too. So they stopped putting that in the newsline. But and nobody really thought anything of it at the time.
Yeah, it's quite pretty normal. I see Carol has her hand raised. So Carol, if you can unmute and ask your question or make a remark, please feel free.
Hi, Jean. Carol Hunter Coleman.
Oh my gosh, Carol.
Wanted to say hello. Jean's husband and my husband at the time joined the lab at the same time.
Right.
And in '72 at a party, Jean said to me, hey, the wives issue is gone now. And so she and I hired on about the same time.
Right. That's
And my husband Sam and I retired in '99. And we're happily living in the mountains around Reno.
Wow.
So
there was another one. Mary Singleton was another one who got hired on at the same time that Carol and I did. And big influx. I said, yay.
Right.
Wives can now get a job at the lab.
Right.
And Carol,
Jean, I had a math degree and was just learning how to do programming.
Right. And
So-
Carol and Barbara Atkinson were high-level women in Livermore computing when NERSC left and I went over there. So
So
I think in answer to one of the questions, what do women need to do? They need to be sure of their information and then say what they have to say. And if it isn't heard, say it again.
good.
Yeah.
Great. Nice.
Okay, nice seeing
Thanks.
you.
Yeah.
wow, thanks for sharing that, Carol. And I can't recall, but I went to a SIGGRAPH in Dallas. The first SIGGRAPH I went to was in Dallas, and I think that was maybe the first time I met Carol, at that time, Carol Hunter.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
thanks so much for your remarks, Carol.
Thank you.
Let's see. So Osni, I just want to ask, any questions come through in the Google Doc at all?
That was all. Yeah, no, I think we have another one in the chat.
Okay, boy, I've seen a lot of great comments have gone by in the chat. So Becky's saying, yay, Jean, and thanks for your work on the HPC Academy. Let's see. Thanks for your answer and advice. Okay, that had to do with Carol's answer. Okay, so so continuing on then. So initially at Livermore Labs, you were, I think you did some work in storage, right? You were working on storage systems. In fact, there's a memo somewhere in these slides from you from 1975, in which you were informing the user base at Livermore Labs that the Packrat system was full. Can you, and this is never a problem that the storage people have, is the system's filling up. That never happens. So,
Right. Yeah, we know that's not true.
So can you briefly describe what Packrat was?
Packrat, I wrote Packrat. It was a disk. We had big disks, and so we would fill up the disks, and then the data would get transferred to the tapes. So we would have to offload the disks onto the tape, but when they would get backlogged, we'd have to ask people to delete their files. And then I wrote a tape repacking, when we had the big 9-track tapes, tape repacking program too. So I'd go in the middle of the night into building 117 and hang the tapes, erase some and repack them and write them on other tapes. So that was a venture in hanging tapes in the middle of the night on the I think it was the 6600 and 7600 tape systems. That was fun.
So you'll be surprised to know when I saw the name of that piece of software was Packrat, I went and looked out to see if there's any software today named Packrat, and sure enough there is. There's a website for something called Packrat.
Oh, really?
It's a Python wheel, I think, for something. So not sure if it's related to storage. It may be related to compression somehow.
Okay. That's fun.
So after you worked on storage for a little bit, I think you got into some graphics, supporting some graphics. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Let's see. I wrote a program called NetPlot. We had these old television monitor display systems. It was kind of state of the art back then that were in some people's offices, and so NetPlot would actually take the data and then the code, and then we would display the information. It was usually 2-dimensional data, graphs and those things on the screens. We also had something called remote job entry terminals, RJETs, sprinkled all over the lab. And it was, we had a system called the Octopus System, which was really state of the art back then too, that connected all of the networks through all of the buildings. So Livermore had a lot of really great technology back then. And I also had all of the graphics libraries that we'd get new libraries from, like the display system. And when we bring them back into the lab, we'd have to modify them to run on our systems, make sure that they ran and that they were correct. And back then people didn't have passwords either. So you could walk into somebody's office and sit down at their terminal and see what they were working on. That changed, definitely changed.
Oh yeah. Now I'm occasionally muting now because every Wednesday morning I've got a landscape crew that hits the house right next to mine, and they can be quite loud. So my apologies. A few more things have come through in the chat here. Let's see. How did you keep up with the fast growing technology?
I'm not sure anybody can ever keep up with that, especially in customer service. You know, they're always bringing in new machines and test machines and new software and operating systems. So we really rely on all of our sysadmin and our, you know, our software people to keep us informed of the really latest technology. But we have, you know, training sessions and all kinds of opportunities to learn about it through, you know, learning online webinars or classes, and the lab is really good at sending you to training too, any kinds of training that you need that's going to help you. So it was great being able to take classes and bringing in, I mean, what's one of the things I do is bring in trainers for Python and C++, that sort of thing. So
Becky Springmeyer asked a question here. I'll expand it slightly. She asked, do you have a lot of SIGGRAPH memories? I'll say, do you have a lot of SIGGRAPH or perhaps Cray user group memories?
SIGGRAPH, yeah, I used to be heavily involved in SIGGRAPH and go down to the meetings down in Sunnyvale, and Cray user group. I went to was honored to go to a Cray user group meeting in Trondheim, Norway, and they didn't have they had, you know, hardware and software, but they didn't have a customer service area where you did, you know, learned how to deal with customers and documentation and training. So I said, boy, you know, that'd be nice if they had that. And they said, well, then why don't you start it? So I started a track for customer service for the Cray user group, and worked my way up to be on kind of a vice president, where I would set up some of the conferences in Kyoto and Berlin and Barcelona. So I got to travel extensively through the Cray user group and meet people from all over the world, because the Crays were sprinkled all over the world, and it was great to meet all of these people. Yeah. Oh yeah, Brett Gorda said he went to Kyoto and Berlin too.
Now, I seem to recall you having a story that a particular city's marathon or maybe some major running race coincided with a Cray users group meeting, and you managed to somehow go and do this amazing run. And next day, even though you were exhausted, you were managing a Cray user group meeting.
Oh, right. That was, I think that was, actually, I ran marathons in London and Barcelona, but
wow.
The one in I didn't actually want anybody to know I was going to run it, but and that was the London one, but the Cray user group was right after that, and just trying to walk up the steps and go to the meetings it was pretty obvious I was having a hard time. But anyway, it was great to be able to take those opportunities on travel to do fun things and stay a couple extra days. So
I see Jeff Cleary made a remark. We still repack tapes today and use that same term. That's fascinating to me. That's amazing.
Yeah, some things never change.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I love history so much, is often we'll go back and look at the way things were done, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And there were people struggling with the same problems, Let's see. Brent said, I tried to ask on a spreadsheet, but Osni hates me.
No, but I asked that question. Oh, Brent, come on.
Oh, okay. It's weird that question was asked. This is how many miles, Gene. So I didn't know how many miles you average, because you used to run pretty regularly with Mike McCoy, I think, at lunchtime, right?
Right.
Yeah. I was thinking you would go out and run 3 miles. For me, 3 miles at lunch would take the entire lunch hour. But I think I calculated if you did that 2 or 3 times a week for 40 years, it was something like 60,000 miles. So it's quite a distance.
Well, one of the best things about the lab, and they don't really do this anymore, is we used to compete. We had a Roadrunners group, and we would compete in industrial league races with HP and IBM all over the Bay Area, and we would host them at Livermore too, and run around the Sandia Loop. But we always won. We had fabulous runners, and so that was and it was, it was associate directors who were doing it, and all kinds of people who participated. So that was a great way to meet people in various areas. So it was great fun. And
So
good
Osni, I'll pester you for a minute. Any new questions in the Google Doc?
No new questions there.
Okay. Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about the distant past. You worked initially in storage, then you started working on graphics, and then kind of your experience is kind of similar, I think, to mine. I support the Visit project, and often I learn what users are trying to do, the science they're trying to do, because they're having a problem with looking at their data. And I think you had a similar experience in trying to help people look at their data with graphics, and that got you into customer support. So what do you, so in that area, what do you, I guess, let me ask you this one, because we deal with this all. How do you deal with do you ever have any really difficult customers and really challenging ones, and how do you deal with that?
Well, mostly they're just frustrated because they can't get their work done. And so you just really try to be helpful to them and figure out what it is that they're doing. Sometimes they're explaining something that isn't really what's happening. So you have to calm them down and really figure out what it is that they're asking. And I like customer service because after dealing with, not only just computing customer service, but, Comcasts and PG&E and everything, and you get put on hold and people are rude to you. So that's what I try to bring to customer service is, really trying to help someone and not saying, read the documentation or transferring them off to somebody else because you don't know the answer, but really trying to find out what their problem is and help them, because that's what our business is anyway. And they really appreciate that. And I've dealt with some really poor customer service areas, we've had, well, I guess I won't go into detail about some of our angry customers.
Well, learning the skills to deal with that, I think, is probably important, especially for many of us who have software that's sort of out there being used by a number of users, and yeah, it's often the case that users will be frustrated for one reason or another. I'm curious, what do you think? What role do you think, for example, documentation plays in the user experience?
Well, I think it's really important. Whenever anybody asks a question, and I don't just say read the documentation. I try to walk through it with them, but documentation it's really, really important. And people they'd rather call and ask a question. And if you can, explain it to them and then point out the documentation, and then sometimes they will point out areas in the documentation that are misleading or, obtuse or very difficult to understand. So it's really helpful if you're explaining it to them and showing them documentation. So it's helpful for you and for them too, to get more clarification. But documentation is really important. And videos, I like the videos too, show you how to do things.
Do you think that documentation is as big a focus area now as it perhaps was when you were first starting?
I think it was really important when we were first starting because there wasn't that much not a good way to communicate. So they had to read the documentation. And now that we have, service desks and people can call, we can point them to the documentation. But back in the, where you didn't have you were mostly doing phone calls, but now we have screens that we can see what people are doing and that sort of thing. So, but yeah, I think documentation will always be a key.
So I see Becky is a quote. She recalls a quote from you. It says, Jean can diffuse, well, maybe not from you, but about you. Jean can diffuse a tense situation in about 30 seconds. That's a good skill.
Right. Well, someone comes in and is irate, you got to calm them down. So They just really want to get their work done. That's all. They're not mad at you. They want to throw the computer out the window because they're not understanding what's going on. So just explain what's going on.
So I see we're down to about 10 minutes left in the hour here, and I wasn't paying attention, Osni, and I'm not sure if you have been either. Did we have a very large number of people who have, quote, just call in only participants?
What do you mean? At some point there were, I think, 110, I think.
No, I mean that were only on the phone and did not have an opportunity to raise hand or perhaps type in the chat. Let me.
I don't know, Mark.
I'm looking through the list right now. Just normally I would just see telephone numbers, I think, from the. No, it looks like pretty much everybody's on.
Oh no, yes, no phone number here.
Okay. Okay, that's a good thing. So again, like to here's a question that just came in. When did the Christmas parties start? So let me just preface before you answer, Jean. I had the privilege of attending a Christmas party at Jean's house, maybe within the last 6 or 7 years. Really enjoyed it, but I was stunned by just how large it was and how many people Jean was able to host at a Christmas party in her home. So with that context, go ahead, Jean.
Actually, I think I started, maybe 20 years ago with a small group, and then it just kept growing. And then I'd invite my neighbors, and it was an open house. And I didn't want people to bring things because typically it was after work, and the only thing people would bring would be chips and salsa. So we had way too much chips and salsa. But yeah, I've had, I just put flyers up and say open house. And the best thing is I want people to bring their families and their kids. And I have an upstairs area where a bunch of women play mahjong. So I turned that into a big Legos playroom for kids and put soft drinks. And so the kids, and John Gyllenhaal has come before many years and done some magic tricks. But it's great to meet, people bring their little kids and they grow up. And I think I've had this, like Steve Ashby's son Hunter when he was 4 years old, and now he's graduated, and just seeing the kids grow up and the families being able to meet each other and bringing husbands and wives and spouses and kids is the fun part for me.
So I see a question from Haya came in here. How do you get the next generation excited about a career in HPC and the lab, especially with the allure of industry so nearby?
Well, that's a difficult question when I go recruiting, because if you explain the mission of the lab and what's important and the work-life balance, and it depends if they want to go out and make a lot of money and work their butts off in Google or LinkedIn or somewhere like that, that's one thing. But if they really want to have a purpose in life and have opportunities to move around and not just get stuck writing code for something that and be able to go to seminars and travel, that's the thing that I push when I recruit, is just opportunities and work-life balance. And Livermore is a nice place to live. It's close to mountains and oceans and cultural events. So it's and like I said before, there's so many opportunities to move around the lab and learn about the science that goes on. It's just fabulous science. So global climate modeling and human genome and the National Ignition Facility, all of that stuff is really exciting to work on. And meeting the scientists too. And you can't tell a scientist from a janitor around there. They all look the same.
Well, and as throughout your career, computing has played a larger and larger role in so many aspects of science now. And so, yeah, it's really, I think, a big challenge for a lot of areas of science to sort of do, be productive in science without getting involved in computing. in some way.
Right.
So I'll read through a couple of other remarks real quick. Becky says, thanks for opening your home to so many groups, students, families, and team members. Let's see, Jesse Gaylord, yeah, Christmas parties, woohoo. Let's see, and then Nolan, soon joy to everyone. Nolan says hi.
Oh, good. Oh, good. Nice.
So one of the I guess we've got just a few minutes left. And Nazni, are there any in the Google Doc? I just want to circle back to you in case I've crossed over anything there.
No, it's we are good there.
Do you have a recollection, Jean, of maybe the most difficult or challenging bug that either you yourself encountered or you were helping a customer with that ultimately turned out to be a pretty gnarly bug?
Oh my gosh. I don't really have one. I think some of the operating system bugs were some of the hardest ones to sign. I wasn't particularly involved in them, but a lot of the times the machines kept crashing and crashing and crashing, and it was mostly the sysadmin that were, day and night up trying to figure out why the machines were crashing. Sometimes it was a vendor bug, but the people that I work with are just really been amazing to the tenacity they have in finding these bugs. Just incredible people to work with.
Well, it's a little like puzzle solving at the end of the day, like what's going on and why, getting to the root cause.
Right.
So I'll ask one other quick question, since I don't see there's some other remarks coming in. Rashawn Knapp says, this has been a real treat. Thank you, Jean. And Becky, can you say something about the computer center facilities? Becky, do you want to TSF? Becky, you want to unmute maybe and clarify?
Yeah, it's a great place to work. I mean, it's a fabulous building. It's 4 stories. It's got fabulous. I mean, the cooling and the heating. And I don't know if Becky might want to say something about that.
Well, Jean, how did you feel? How did you feel being there in 451 and watching that building rise out of nowhere? Must have been pretty remarkable.
Oh my gosh, it was, yeah. When they were building that, the 483, the 4-story with huge computer room floors, it was just amazing. And all of the downstairs facilities with the cooling and watching them, with the where they were putting the wiring and the cooling underneath the big main machine floors. That was fabulous. The technology that went into that was amazing. Yeah.
A lot of history there, from MFECC all the way to Terrascale Simulation Facility, which we should not have named that, but
right.
Anyway.
Just now it's Xscale and beyond.
Yes.
Well, so Jean, I
The
guess
slides are great, Mark.
Oh, super. Glad people found like those. I had a lot of fun searching around, especially for some of the stuff that I saw, from Jean early on in the 70s. But real quick, Jean, would you say overall you were able to have a lot of fun in your career in HPC? And if so, what do you think made it the most fun?
Oh no, it's the best place it's just amazing. The people are so nice and so helpful. And we have morning meetings every morning, and people joke around, and we have if somebody makes a mistake or introduces a bug, we have a donut rule where people have to bring the donuts, and so you have to confess your sins, and everybody cheers because they get donuts. So that's what's the fun place, is just people are so nice and supportive and helpful and available all the time. It's been a fabulous place to work.
Jean, I'd like to say thank you for so many decades of support for STEM and all the young women at Expanding Your Horizons, all the things you've done for Superkids and so on. It seems to have been a theme throughout, and you've been such a great role model for all of us. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for reminding of that, Becky. Yeah, that is phenomenal. And I see we're up on the hour here, Jean. I certainly appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and learn more from you. And I could spend a lot of time doing this, but I think we'll have to bring it to a close. I do see, let's see, Soon Joy, thank you so much. Yeah, so some thank yous coming in. Thanks to all that attended and all that asked questions. And Osni, well, I guess we'll circle it back to you then.
Sure. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Mark. I'll just share my final slide here. Let's share my slide. Just thank you again. Thank you all for participating. Feel free, please, to give us some feedback. We want to improve this series. And the next webinar in the series is going to be in about a month. Scientific software ecosystems and communities, why we need them and how each of us can help them thrive. Lois Kerfman-McInnes from Oregon National Laboratory will be talking. And so that's I have pasted already this link in the chat so people can register. Thank you all again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right.